So that wet cover that we talked about on top of the tailings management area, this is actually what one would look like. There's a person down here for scale. And what a wet or water cover is essentially a layer of water that's maintained on top of the tailings. And like we know, you can go down to the bottom of a swimming pool, and if you try to take a breath, you're not going to find any oxygen, you're not going to breathe. So that's how we prevent tailings from oxidizing, is by keeping a high degree of saturation or a water cover on top of them. So it keeps them inert, so they stay as these, a crushed up normal rock, and they don't rust and convert into these potentially acid generating rocks. The second type of cover is a dry cover system. So we obviously can't take a large blanket of water and drape it over top of a hill, like the stockpiles. So what we do is we can do the same concept, we just have to maintain a wet layer. And we do that on top of the mine rock by placing clay. We take that clay and we compact it, and we squeeze it, so it becomes very, very, very tight. And this holds a lot of water in this layer. So this layer here stays very wet, and it's analogous to if you took a washcloth that was dry, you could blow quite easily through it. If you get that washcloth and you make it very damp, and you try to blow through it, the air doesn't move through that fabric. That's what we're trying to do with this clay layer. But we can't leave clay out exposed to the atmosphere, or else it dries and it cracks. We see this in fields and sidewalks all the time. So what we have to do is we add a layer on top of this as a protection layer to keep this saturated and moist so oxygen can't get down into the rock. But what it provides is another opportunity to support growth of vegetation. So you can see here, just in this image, has some vegetation growing and the roots reaching down into here to find their nutrients and their water. So this layer actually serves two purposes. One is to help keep this layer, the engineered layer, really wet. But the secondary and almost important benefit of it is for vegetation as well. And we can play around a lot with this top layer. We can make it thinner so there's not as much water in the soil, so we can get grasses and dry species to come in. Or if we want some other species, like a poplar or a tree or a spruce, we can increase how thick that layer is, give the tree more water so it can grow bigger. So we can play with these types of things to get the desired types of plants and animals we want to come back.
So I'm just thinking, because what she said about the trees and her prayers, the tree, is it going to be growing differently compared to what it is in the natural vegetation now, and compared to man-made vegetation? Is it going to be growing differently? Is it going to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there should be no difference, because what we're...
It's going to be different, because I know that they use trees or natural plants as medicines, and it's going to be totally different compared to taking it out on its natural atmosphere.
It should be the same, because what we're doing is we're taking, initially when they start mining, they took that layer off, that clay layer, right, which was natural, that was always there, and they've set that aside, and they've mined, and what's going to happen is that layer is going to go back over top of the stockpiles. So it's the same layer, the same type of material that the trees are used to growing into, and then just planting the trees on top of it. So the trees, in essence, will have the same material that they've always grown in, just in a new location.
And from the tailings ponds, I know there's all kinds of chemicals that they're using in there, right?
So the tailings ponds, we're not looking to grow anything in there at this time. You want the dams to stay stable, so you don't want tree roots and things like that growing into them. Grasses and things like that are okay, but in terms of trying to get something to grow in a 1 meter water cap, you're not going to be able to grow trees, let's say, but there might be the opportunity to look at other things down the road. But we don't know what those tailings are going to be yet at this stage. That's more information that's going to have to come, and then more of these meetings to discuss that. But those are the sorts of things that will have to be taken into consideration. So the company I work for, we do a lot more of this engineering side of the reclamation. So I work with people that work on computers a lot, and they do all the modeling inputs. And we can make sure that those stockpiles are very stable, that they'll withstand earthquakes, floods, all sorts of things like that. We're also really good at, we built these sorts of cover systems around the world, in the hundreds, and we're really good at making sure that these rocks don't oxidize by covering them up with these engineered layers. That's all good, but that's about 50% of what reclamation is. Reclamation is a lot more than that. So this is actually from the Rainy River site right now. We can say that we're going to do these cover systems and they're going to work, but you know, the good question for you guys to ask us would be, well, do they work? And that would be a very fair question to ask. So those cover systems that we proposed are being trialed right now. They're being built in small areas to test them, to make sure that they will be adequate. And this is an example of it here. This is the rock, and this is the compacted clay going in over top of it. This was another compacted clay layer. I was just at a site in Finland 3 weeks ago, where we were doing this same sort of project for another mine company. And we put sensors down in the rock to make sure that our cover systems are doing a good job. So we have to be able to make sure on an ongoing basis through time, you know, from the time the cover system goes on, off into the future, that it's still doing its job and it's working.
So who's paying for this? What, NEWGOLD?
Yep.
Oh, no. He doesn't know it yet.
So this is actually the same cover system here. This is that clay layer in the previous photo, and then we're adding on that 1 meter layer of growth medium. So this, in their site, this is in the Arctic, so it's different types of grass and stuff that they'll be planting on top of this one. But I just wanted to give you an example of what these cover systems will eventually look like once they're built.
I have one little more question. So, how long has NEWGOLD been using you guys as consultants?
So I hired them about 6 months ago,
And other
Because-
mines too, or for NEWGOLD?
just for Rainy River. Because I've worked with Michael O'Kane, his boss, or the owner of the company, for many years. And his specialty, as Andrew pointed out, is to build these soil covers. Not many people do them. They're not simple. They look simple, but they are complex in that you've got to take into account different factors, you know, and especially in the Rainy River, you know how this year's been so dry, and other years are so wet. The cover system has to be able to handle all weather conditions. And that's why that overburden placed over top of that compacted clay has to be the right thickness. And we'll go into it a little bit further. But O'Kane, so this is similar to what was planned before, but there was no engineering in it, right? We didn't know how thick to make the clay cover, given the clays that we have. So now we have clays, we know what we need, so I wanted a good company to design it. And what we're doing that, you know when they build roads, and you've seen the roads being built here, they have that clay layer. There is clay on the roads, and they compact it to get it as hard as they can. And they use rollers, right? Well, we need to come up with a system that we can build over a large area. And so I want to test the clay with track packing, you know, the tracks of the dozers going back and forth. So the other day, Andrew, we had a big area, well, you saw it there, spread out, and then track spread it out, and then we tested the density. And then ran over it a few more times, tested the density. Ran over it a few more times. So how many times does a dozer have to go back and forth to get the density? Because like any cover or any waterproof blanket, there's no 99% solution. It's not an 80-20 rule. If you're going to keep oxygen out, you've got to be 100%. So if you go, can you go back to that, what we're doing, the experiment we're doing? So Andrew's supervising this work, and it's hard to see about this point. Well, can you point out the clay and the trench? So we're tying into the clay below. So you know in our area it's all clay. There's clay everywhere.
So this rock here, this potentially asteroid rock, is sit on top of clay. And what we're trying to do is, like putting out a campfire, is starve it of all its oxygen. So to smother it, we're smothering it with clay on top. And so what we need to do is we excavate this trench here along the wall. We build a clay wall all the way down until we hit other clay. So it's impermeable all the way around. And then we wrap that clay material back up on top of this and compact it and roll it. And then we start adding our subsequent layers. So this ditch is about 1 meter wide, and it goes down 2 meters of just a solid clay wall, and then it's connected to the clay underneath it.
The original clay, so undisturbed clay. So that way we get the, well, we call it the burrito. We're making burritos and we're putting that pag rock inside a clay burrito. And that's going to happen throughout the life of the mine. And that's what he was talking about, progressive reclamation. So on the outside layer will continually go up, but on the, you know, and as we build there will be clay layers put in between the rock layers to help get that seal.
Out of curiosity, I know there's been like earthquakes here and there that are really minor. Have you guys considered that in case it happens in this area?
100% they have to be considered. It's regulation that all engineering designs, whether it be for tailings, dam structures, or mine rock stockpiles, have to be able to survive earthquakes of a certain magnitude. So that's a #1 consideration.
So the depth of the clay that you guys are compressing and...
Yeah.
And it's mainly to the slope. So this, you know, like one of the earlier drawings, the dams were like this and then they went out flatter. That is all agreed to by government and our engineers and third-party world experts who participated in the analysis of dams that collapse around the world. So it's their recommendation that we went to 1 in 11, and then they tested with seismic loading. So you know how the earthquake in Mexico City, even though it wasn't a big earthquake in terms of that number, like you hear about 7.8 or 8 on the Richter scale, Mexico wasn't that big, but Mexico's built on clay. It's a big bowl of clay and jelly. So when the earthquake comes, it's like you're shaking a bowl of jello and then you stop and it's still sort of vibrating. This is all run through those tests. So it's very stable, and so it's called seismic loading. You know, how much of a shock can it take sitting there? The other good news is that with all of these structures, the longer it sits there, the stronger it gets. So we build the dam today to a certain strength. They call it a safety factor. We use a safety factor of 1.5. Whatever, it's just a number, but but 5 years from now it'll be 1.6, and then it'll be 2. And so as the dam gets older and as these dumps get older, they settle and get stronger. And
so what was it before you guys went and measured the scale?
Well, actually that's a good question. I don't know how you would measure that, because how that number comes about is a thickness of an engineer, so much material of this type, so much material of this type, but nature doesn't do that. You'll have a pocket of muskeg, and then you'll have clay, and then, so it's hard to get a factor of safety for, because we know that it may move. But the chances of it here are fairly low, so, but anyway, it's tested. Yeah, long answer for a quick, for the question.
So one of the, I guess, important concepts then is, you know, I talked about the engineering side of things, but there's also the less engineered side of things. And this is equally important, maybe more important as well, as, you know, local knowledge traditional knowledge, and that is trying to meet these end land use, whether that's wintering white-tailed deer habitats, whether that's medicinal plants. We need to know what those are and what requirements they need so that these people in the desk can write and figure out what materials need to be there to support those. So that's an important link.
Is that a job posting with the body sentences?
And no, it's an expression to say it's, we need public feedback. Our company, we don't do closure plans in a vacuum. It needs to be supportive of everybody, right? And so
I get it. It just looks nice.
I'll change it. So I'll just, again, we've seen this example already of the mine, but I like to think of closure systems, closure landscapes in terms of like these fundamental building blocks, you know, trying to build the landscape back up into something, what everybody wants and what's desirable, right? So we can start picking out these different areas, whether it's the flat top slopes or the south slopes maybe being sunnier and warmer and the snow leaves there sooner so animals eat. Whether it be the wetlands through, you just start thinking about what can all these different things start to look like when we get to closure. And it's not just like arm waving and saying that, okay, yeah, we can make this and we can do this. I don't want to sell promises. They're not promises, and we have lots of examples where this is a mine rock stockpile, so similar to what would be at Rainy River, except Rainy River's West Mine rock stockpile would fit into maybe this area here. So this one is huge.
Where is that?
This is another one in Turkey as well.
So that the stockpile, that rock stockpile,
Yeah.
will be covered?
That's right. And you can see on the surface here, sorry?
Which year was that?
I couldn't tell you on this one, I'm sorry.
That it will be covered with local
That's right.
vegetation and stuff like that?
He's gonna show, this one already is from planted, and then he's got a couple of pictures that show it as it grows.
Yes.
So on the surface here, you might be able to pick out the little tiny dots everywhere. Well, what happened was there was a cover system that was put on this example. And again, Europeans really like planting trees and tree harvest and forestry. So what they wanted was more trees. So they got lots of trees. All these trees were planted on top of the cover. And this is the small section here. If we zoom in, that's what it looks like. And about 15, 20 years later, this is what this image here now looks like. So we're very successful in, you know, growing the types of trees that were desired and stated early on in the closure plan, and bringing that closure plan all the way fully through full circle until we can come to fruition.
So with your the closure plan, and if the First Nation agrees to the closure plan, so they would pick and choose as to what trees should go in there, or do you guys have,
That's what we're asking.
Okay.
That's the input we want.
I think it would be the same local vegetation that should be regrown in there,
Right,
basically.
you're right, it is the same, but where we need some support is, you know, like on the south side of a hill, like if you want white-tailed deer, I know from reading stuff that they like to feed in the wintertime.
Yeah, there's a
On
lot
the
in
south
there.
side of the hill, where the sun burns off the snow and they can get at the grass. So I don't want thick trees on the south side, I want grass. And then
So you want an easy shot.
So to do that, you need to tell me where you want to put the blind. But then deer also need escape habitat, because there's
Yeah.
wolves here,
Exactly.
and cougars, and then they need nighttime habitat.
Yeah.
So on the north side of a hill, so you know those hills that we'll make,
Yeah.
on the north side, we want, I think, I'm just saying, fir trees, so that they can stay under the fir trees when there's lots of snow and it's really cold.
Yeah, I kinda, like, before we went into that, and you were talking about that, the rocks and the rock piles and that stuff, I kinda had an idea where you guys were getting into before you even went into that. My thinking was farming, regeneration of the land to its natural state. And you're basically right, it should, like, whatever the other bands say, the other communities, it should be back to the natural state as it was, like the trees as well as vegetation.
Right.
That's-
And everybody says the same thing.
yeah.
The question would be, is we do have some, so you know that overburden layer that Andrew's been talking about that you put on top to protect the clay layer? If I make it this thick, I'll only get grass, because there's only enough moisture that we can store to grow grass.
Exactly.
If I make it this thick, I can grow pine trees,
Yes.
right? So that, and that's what he's sort of saying, by controlling the thickness of that layer, and whether it's on the north side or the south side and all of that, you can almost pick what kind of landscape you want. Do you want grass? Do you want shrubs? Do you want trees? And then you take soil. So if I want to reclaim an area that was blueberries before, you know, under the trees, I'll scrape some existing blueberry fields and spread it in that area, because it's not just the blueberry seeds, but it's what's attached to the roots, the mycorrhiza, the bacteria, all of that community has to be there, or I'm not going to get blueberries. I could take the clay and plant the blueberry shrub, plant. It'll grow, maybe it'll survive, but it's not going to spread. So we want to create the conditions that allow the plants to survive and spread. And that's where we need some help, because if it's deer habitat, I'm not a hunter, so I just know from reading textbooks, you need those kind of habitats. Food, escape, and shelter. If we want whippoorwill, or if you want grouse, what do we need? I don't know. Spruce trees, if you want a spruce grouse.
And they're not,
But
they're not
nobody
all,
wants to eat those.
we don't have to come to a consensus today, but they're just things for everybody to take home and think about. You know, the different, they see what the aspects of the mine look like, what the reclamation looks like. So maybe we can now start thinking about imprinting these ideas on top of this.
So what about the water? I know, like, with different First Nations within the area, when it came to the mine, they were concerned about the water. Like, how are you guys gonna regenerate with the water that was there previously? Not just as the lakes or little ponds, and also the little creeks that were there.
Well, this, I mean, you can, but water is, there's, watersheds are, like the mine is relatively small compared to a watershed. So water will follow its path, and so what we need to do when we recreate a structure, almost like what Andrew's going to show here, how you protect it, is you know water's going to, you know snow's going to fall, you know it's going to melt, so you know that in certain areas you're going to get a lot of erosion. So what you want to create is an environment that doesn't allow the erosion, or even a mixture of soil with rocks, so that we call that self-healing. So as the soil erodes away, the rocks get thicker and thicker, and soon you've got a riverbed, right? So all these things we can plan, but water is inevitable. It's going to come. You've got to design it, and this is a good example what he's going to show you here. You've got to design it to take those features in hand. So in some areas you want to hold water, so we create a little bit of a bog, a little bit of a depression. So it's going to hold it and then slowly release it, right? In other areas, when it's coming off of a dump, you've got to create those pathways so that it's slow, right? If you let it rip over the edge, it'll rip. And then, I don't know about the Anishinaabe culture, but you were talking about medicinal plants. In other places where I've been, the traditional wisdom was that the beaver is considered the healer of the land. And so if you have beavers and allow beavers to establish, you've created a land where medicinal plants can grow back. And in this culture, rat root was an important plant, medicinal plant. And so the beavers create that aquatic habitat. So one of the things we might be able to consider is how do we plant the trees, the poplars that beavers like to eat, and then we make sure our structures are strong enough so that if a beaver dam is built, it doesn't erode and make the structures unstable. And so it takes a lot of thought and planning, and that's the kind of thing, again, how we handle the water, is if you allow beaver dams to go in there, then they slow water down, as they go from dam to dam to dam, that helps. So that's the kind of thought that goes into protecting and healing the land and getting it back.
And so, yeah, you had a question earlier about, are there other examples in Canada? So this kind of actually brings together 2 points. One, your water question, and 2, other examples in Canada. This was a mine in Sudbury, so not too far away. You can see here, this is their pit, actually. This is the pit wall around the back. And they had meetings similar to what we're having right now, community members involved. We were involved as consultants as well as a mining company, and everybody sat down and discussed, the same idea, this closure plan, and worked on it throughout time. Well, then when closure finally came of the mine, they now had this book and this manual that told them how they were going to close everything and reclaim it. So what people wanted and the community members wanted was, a certain aesthetic, how the mine should look at the end of the day. And so we put together this drawing of, this is the ideal look of what this mine was going to be. So much like these renderings here and that final rendering there. And I always think this is really neat because at the end of the day, we built it, we constructed it, we healed it, and then through the vegetation, this is actually the site. So you can see, again, the pit wall is in here, and then the rock outcropping, and this is how we control a lot of the water. So this is a south slope, so a lot of snow in this part of Sudbury, and it would melt and it would come down the slope. And we realized that you can't just have water rushing down, a soil slope. It has to mimic something like in real life. So we had to build creek beds, essentially, on the slopes. So that's what all these little fingers are, is they're just false creek beds to help get that water down into this wetland in the bottom. So this wetland is now several years older than is shown in this photo. It has the bulrushes and ducks and bullfrogs and all sorts of things in it that this wetland needed. So I just wanted to use this as an example to say, Rainy River is not special. Sorry, it's we've done this in numerous other places in some very similar climates, areas, and types of mines as Rainy River mine site. We just need to have the right people at the table with the right questions and comments.
Is that all your closure plan is gonna look like you're in Sudbury, where's that one, Turkey? Is it basically the same outcome?
So yeah, essentially, I mean, they'll all look different. Like Rainy River won't look like this because you guys will want it to look like something else. But the people who were involved in this Whistle mine site wanted it to look a certain way, and we worked as hard as we could in the closure plan to get it to look like that. So again, if you compare, it's pretty close.
So what are they using it for now?
Nothing. It's reclaimed land. It's been no longer mined. It's done.
Just to look at. Yeah.
No, I would imagine that animals use it and
Well, it could be useful.
I have a book at home. It's called 101 Things You Can Do at the Mine, to reclaim. And there's, as you said, golf courses.
Yeah.
A famous one in Canada is Bouchard Gardens in Victoria. That was an old mine. you know, where they have all the plants. You've got, in Saskatoon, you've got the synchrotron, that was an underground mine. They have research mushroom farms, they like underground mines. So there are 100 golf courses are common. So there are many, many things you can make. And so what this is this is basically a conversation to start thinking that, hey, there are options here, truly options. You can have grass, you can have trees, you can have water, you can have a bog, you can have a fen. But it takes planning, and it has to happen now, because as you mine the rock and you put it in certain places, you want to put it somewhere where it's going to give you what you want 20 years from now. So you don't have to remove it and handle it again. And so that's why this planning this isn't over today, right? This goes on every year or twice a year. We can meet with a group of people to start digging deeper. What do you want to see? Today is to introduce the idea and to tell you that we can do it, but we need input, you know? And truly input. I'm not telling you what we're going to do. I want to hear what you want, right?
So, what's your name again?
I'm Daryl Martindale, the mine manager at NEWGOLD,
Okay, so Daryl,
environmental mine manager.
Careful with that title.
Yeah. Title, don't tell the mine manager.
Okay, so Daryl, would you want to put your own house right smack in the middle of this mine?
When it's finished? Oh yeah, I wouldn't mind at all. I've closed mines before. I may look young, but I'm actually over 60. And I've been in mining all my life. And
Now you're lying to me.
No. I have my birth certificate. Anyway.
So-
One question though, I know what previous presentations of NEWGOLD, and one of them under the IBA, I think it stated something about that the land will be designated whichever, for the First Nation we want. Have they chosen the area where they want the land?
I think that's evolving as of right now, because like the mine is like in development right now. That's the way I see it. And we're talking about reclamation of the land.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
that
part
will,
of reclamation,
and then
my
it
question.
will evolve over time, because each time everything changes over time. Just like regulations, laws and stuff like, everything changes. We don't know what's gonna happen in the year 2032. I don't know what's gonna happen. You're gonna need that belt pipe or some shit. Anyway, yeah, everything's gonna be evolved. It will evolve. Yes, of course, the land will be reclaimed to its, well, not to its natural state, but the way we want it.
We can get pretty close.
Yeah,
And
that's
this
exactly
is
it, yeah.
maybe a good example to that. This is a site I work at specifically. This is just right after closure of one of these stockpile facilities. This is some monitoring equipment, so to make sure things are working. We came back 15 years later, and this is that exact same photo. And that's not, you know, a special case. I can go through hundreds and hundreds of these different types of photos I have. Again, this is right after closure where they planted some grass to try to get trees and things coming up afterwards. And again, this is 15 years later, you know, aspens or poplars, whatever they're called here, and black spruce coming in as well. And actually the person that took that photo told me that they had to be very careful going in there because there's now black bears that like living in this area with deer and other things too. So it's not outside the realm of thinking, it's just a matter of planning accordingly now and through time before we get to closure.
That's why you see it, that's why I say, like, right now we're just talking about reclamation as well as the vegetation and whatnot on it. And the thing is, like, we'll get into, like, in the future, the development of the land.
That's exactly right, because there's going to be big buildings there, and somebody would say, hey, don't tear down that building, you know, because that building could house a big factory.
Yes.
Or that building there could house, who knows what, 25 arenas, you know, if you want to have international hockey tournaments.
Yeah.
So there's, yeah, and so we're assuming, you know, like today, you're going to see the closure plan where people don't want to see any buildings.
Yeah, exactly.
But 10 years from now, and that's why the closure plan is a living document.
Yeah.
Next year, you may think different. But we capture it. That's why these guys capture those ideas and write them down. And every year that closure plan gets bigger and bigger. Still, we'll talk about the birds, we've got the plants, but now you say, oh, we want a building and we want water running right by the building if we can, and we're going to use that water to make widgets. Right. And so our economic development is going to include making widgets.
And that's why I said like, it's like a big playground. That's why I said that.
Yep.
Playground, I'm thinking ahead. And right now it's about reclamation, right?
Right.
And then from there, develop.
That's a very good way to put it, actually, because the government and stakeholders so far have said, put it back the way it was.
Yes.
But then as your economic development grows and matures, you're going to say, oh no, there's another opportunity. We've got good roads, we've got high tension power lines, we could do other things here that, you know, will sustain the community. But yeah, you reclaim that and you reclaim that, and I want to see a lake where the pit was. But this part here, you know, that's the dialogue that has to occur.
Yes, exactly. Like we can build you a big deer farm for your sought after 10-point buck.
Sure, have hunters come in for $10,000 each to shoot a 10-point deer, and then you guys manufacture them in the factory there. Anyway, the point of this is to begin the dialogue knowing that there's opportunities to
For
truly
future opportunities.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm looking at right now. Like for me, yes, we're talking reclamation of the land, but I'm also thinking the future for the people, not only for our natives, but as well as non-natives, and work as a team. That's what I'm looking at. Reclamation, and then as to how it's going to be used. Well, I said my 2 cents worth, and now I gotta go to LCBO and I'm all stressed out from this. Just kidding.
and solve more world problems.
Well, you guys have a good day.
Yeah, thank you.
So where is the money come over the years to get the people together to start talking about how they want this reclamation?
Right.
Is that
So
is that in the IBAs?
Yep, well, in the IBA, there are typically, not everyone's the same, but typically there's an environmental group, right? There's the JICs, which are the Joint Industry Committees, and then a subcommittee is an environmental committee. So there's somebody from your community, 2 people typically, and they'll meet with myself or other people in my staff and somebody from Stacy's staff. And we meet on a regular basis, maybe quarterly, maybe annually, it depends, in the community. So nobody needs to go traveling far away. And then we have those discussions about all sorts of things, not just this, but oh, I heard this is happening at the mine. What can you tell us about it? Or I heard this on the radio. How does the mine think about that? That kind of discussion. Is that what you were
Well, yeah,
wondering?
and then the other thing was, I don't know if you're familiar with the IBA. The last meeting I attended, we weren't allowed to look at it or whatever. So when does that document, that agreement become available for band members to look at? And when would there be some education about what the IBA contains?
I haven't even seen it.
Okay, so is this something that Mr. McGinnis would be answering?
He may be able to, yeah.
And where is he?
I think he ran over to the band office.
And you're,
I'm Allison.
oh, he's in.
I'm the community coordinator, so I work with Will on the community.
So you would be one of the people that would be connecting with the community?
Yep.
Because then, actually, maybe it'd be nice to get your contact information?
Yeah.
Because it just seemed to me that when the IBA, at that last meeting, you know, the document couldn't be shared, you know, there was just like this big mystery. So, you know, when is that big mystery gonna be lifted? And, you know, when will the community learn about what is contained in that IBA?
And that, maybe that's a question for
Chief?
the chief and council as well.
Yeah. The reason is not every band has a different agreement, right? And so it's amongst the communities to some
Share it?
negotiation. Yeah, and so that you don't want jealousies, you don't want those kind of problems, and that's why chief and council has to decide. But the IBAs talk about NEWGOLD's accountability is to meet on a regular basis regarding environmental issues, talk about this, this, and this. So there's no, if you will, I can almost say that's the case with every community. Me and my team go to every community and sit with them to talk about environmental issues that people have on their mind. And minutes are taken, and on other matters, I don't know. I just deal with the environment and what's going on at the mine. So if you have a question, hey, I hear you had a truck leak oil on this road. What did you do to clean it up, and where did the dirt go? I can answer those questions. And so everybody's got different issues, right? Some people are more concerned, like here, maybe there's more interest in the water. Water's more important because you're on the lake, whereas other communities aren't on the water, right? And so they've got land issues. They're more concerned about the deer. So that's why it's, for the environment side, I can answer those different environmental questions. The economic opportunities and the employment opportunities, that's a different matter. Yeah.
As far as sharing it with the community members, though, I think is what you're really getting at.
Yeah.
That would be up to the leadership of your.
So, this question has the leadership.
I apologize, I need to catch a flight.
Oh, right.
But
All right, thanks,
I'm happy to leave.
Have a safe trip.
Daryl and Allison, all my contact information. If you have more questions, actually on the Rainier River Mine site for the next while anyways. Just working with the closure plan. So again, if there's comments, questions, and concerns, myself and the rest of my team are writing the plan, as we speak right now as we're going. But we can incorporate some of those thoughts and ideas. So please feel free to share those.
And then as soon as this plan's finished, then we start collecting ideas for the next one.
Thank you very much for your
Yeah.
questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Very much? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out. Yeah. Thanks for all those good questions. The manager of all things.
Okay, so we have, yeah, thanks.
So, har du gå in and in your office with that?
Kan jag?
Ja.
Både i